Brennan Manning told the story of his friend, an Episcopal priest, who rushed into his office one Monday morning. He scrawled out a resignation letter. He left it on his desk. He was leaving his church. And then he rushed home and he sat at his kitchen table where he wrote out a letter to his wife and his three kids, all of whom were under the age of 10. And he explained in that letter how he was leaving them. He was abandoning them. And then he fled. He went to New England, where he got a job as a logger in Vermont. And he was in this aluminum trailer that he had rented. And one day, Manning said that the temperature dropped to below 10 degrees, and the only source of heat, this space heater that was in the trailer, died. He said within minutes, the temperature in the trailer dropped to below zero. And in a fit of rage, his friend grabbed the space heater, tossed it out the window, and said, "Christ, I hate you. Damn it, God, get out of my life. I'm tired of this Christian crap. It's all over." And then he sunk to his knees, weeping. He said in that moment, he heard Jesus weeping with him. And he heard this still small voice saying, "It's okay, Kevin. I love you. I accept you. I understand." That day, Kevin Martin said he heard the voice of Jesus as it collided with him, crashed into his life, and forever changed everything. Later that afternoon, he packed his bags. He went home to be reconciled with his family and with his church. See, for Kevin Martin that day, Jesus crashed into his life, collided with him, interrupted his regularly scheduled program, and he was never the same again. See, it's interesting. Kevin Martin knew Jesus. He was an Episcopal priest, but he hadn't yet met Jesus, right? We're in this series right now called Life Interrupted, and it's so fitting to be in this series, especially with what's going on with COVID-19. Our life has been interrupted by this. COVID-19 has crashed into our lives. But before all this, we've had our life interrupted, right? We've had moments and times where things have crashed into our lives, collided with us, and forever changed everything. Brother-in-law of mine, he was in a helicopter accident where the helicopter just crashed down and just ruined his back. He walks with the assistance of a cane now. His life is forever changed because of that collision. A friend of mine, he was in a car crash where he broke several bones. He was in a coma for a while. His life is forever changed, altered because of this collision. And you and I, we've all had collisions in our life. Maybe not literally, but things have collided with our lives, interrupted our lives, that have forever changed us, forever altered us. Maybe it was the day that your parents sat you down and said, "We're getting a divorce." Or maybe it was the day that your spouse handed you the papers and said, "I need you to sign this because I want a divorce." Or maybe it was when you got some papers in the mail. It was your acceptance letter to the college, right? Or maybe it was when you got the phone call from the doctor and they said the tumor is cancerous. Or maybe it was the call that you got when your wife said, "Honey, guess what? We're having a baby." And everything changed in that moment. Maybe it was the call you got when you got the job acceptance, the job offer. I mean, whatever, all kinds of things have crashed into our lives, collided into our lives. I know for me, it was when I heard the first cry of our daughter when she was born, of our son when he was born. Things have crashed into your life, collided into your life that have forever altered you. Maybe it was the time that you stood in front of the casket of your friend, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, your child. So we've all experienced moments where things have collided into us, crashed into us, interrupted our life, and we were forever altered because of that. One of the most, actually the most controversial figure in all of history who's ever lived on this planet was Jesus. And the reason why Jesus was so controversial is because he constantly collided with people, calling them to live a better life, a new life, a life he called them to, a life he created them to live. And when Jesus collided with people, they were never the same. And 2,000 years ago, Jesus crash landed on this planet, born of a virgin. You know the story, we celebrate it every Christmas, but Jesus crash landed on this planet and things were never the same. after that. He launched this public ministry at the age of 30. He crashed onto the scene, and things were never the same when he interrupted people's regularly scheduled program. And when Jesus first started his ministry, he got together some guys to be his apostles, his disciples, his apprentices, his boys, his crew that he was going to teach and they were going to learn from. And here's a list of the people Jesus called to follow him. It says, these are the names of the 12 apostles. First, Simon, who's called Peter, and his brother Andrew, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, Philip and Bartholomew, Thomas and Matthew, the tax collector, James, son of Alphaeus and Thaddeus, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot, who betrayed him. I want to take a moment and just cherry pick some of the names from this list so that we can see how Jesus crashed into their lives and forever changed everything for them. First there's Peter. Peter. I say that because my son, he's 3 years old. Every time, like when we're reading the Bible and we go through stuff, when we come to Peter, he always says, Peter. I don't know why I just share that with you so it'll forever be ingrained in your mind when you hear the word Peter. But Jesus comes across Peter, and here's what happens. Matthew 4:18. As Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw two brothers, Simon, called Peter, and his brother Andrew. They were casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen, because that's what fishermen do. Come follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you out to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. Going on from there, he saw two other brothers, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John. They were in a boat with their father Zebedee, preparing their nets. Jesus called them, and immediately they left the boat and their father and they followed him. So Jesus calls these guys and they leave everything and follow him. But that's kind of an impartial part of the story. I mean, Matthew records this, but he leaves some stuff out. Luke actually has another rendition of this where he gives us some more details. Because from Matthew's reading, it seems like Jesus comes along and says, hey, follow me. They say, okay, fine. But Luke actually gives a little more detail on what happened. Here's what Luke says. When he had finished speaking, he said to Simon, put down into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. See what happened was Jesus was walking by the Sea of Galilee, and there are these crowds that are following him. So Jesus gets into Peter's boat, like you do, because we all get into strangers' boats, right? He gets into Peter's boat, and he's teaching the crowd that have followed him. They're standing on the bank of the lake. He's teaching them. And then when he's done teaching them, he says to Peter, put down into deep water and let down the nets for a catch. And Simon, Peter. Simon answered, Master, we've worked hard all night and haven't caught anything. But because you say so, we'll let down the nets. The net. See, Peter heard something in Jesus' teaching so that afterwards, when Jesus says, go out into deep water, even though Peter says, hey, we've been fishing all night, we hadn't caught anything, because of what he heard about Jesus, because of what he heard from Jesus, he said, you know what? But because you say so, we'll do it. Doesn't make any sense, but we'll do it because you say so. There's this trust that Peter has with Jesus. I wonder, has Jesus been calling you to do some things and you've been putting it off? I wonder if you need to have a Peter moment where you say, you know what? It doesn't make sense. I don't get it. I don't even want to do this, but Jesus, because you say so, I'll do it. Because look at what happens when Peter follows what Jesus said. So when they had done so, but because you say so, we will. When they had done so, you got to follow through on what you say you're going to do. You want to see the blessing, you got to put some work in. When they had done so, they caught such a large number of fish that their nets began to break. So they signaled their partners in the other boat. They came to help them, and they came and they filled both boats so full they began to sink. When Simon Peter saw this, he fell at Jesus' knees and said, go away from me, Lord, I am a sinful man. For he and all his companions were astonished at the catch of fish they had taken. And so were James and John, the sons of Zebedee, Simon's partners. These guys had been fishermen for years. They never had a catch like this. And then Jesus said to Simon, don't be afraid. From now on, you'll fish for people. So they pulled their boats up on shore, left everything, and followed him. See, the reason why Simon, James, John, these guys leave everything is because they saw something in Jesus they had never seen before. He crashed into their lives, collided with them, and they were forever changed. So this is Peter. But there's another guy on this list that astonishes me, that I relate with a lot. His name is Matthew. Matthew the tax collector. It's amazing to me that Jesus calls Matthew because, again, Matthew is a tax collector, and it's tax season right about now. And if you owe the IRS, does anybody owe the IRS? Come on. How do you feel about tax collectors? Exactly. That's how they felt about tax collectors back then. People hated tax collectors because tax collectors were seen as scoundrels. They were seen as people who would skim off the top. They were just these terrible people. Everybody hated tax collectors, right? And then Jesus comes along and he sees Matthew, the tax collector. Look at what happens. It says, as Jesus went on from there, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the tax collector's booth. Follow me, he told him. And Matthew got up and followed him. Well, Jesus, by the way, here's this holy, righteous man calling this guy who's seen as a scoundrel, this guy who's seen as this thief, essentially. And he's saying, hey, come follow me. Matthew's like, oh, I've never been invited to anything like this. This is, wait, you would accept even me? Right? So when he gets the invitation, he gets up and follows Jesus. He says, of course, if you accept me, I'm there. Follow me, he told him, and Matthew got up and followed him. Verse 10, while Jesus was having dinner at Matthew's house, many tax collectors and sinners came and ate with him and his disciples. And when the Pharisees saw this, they asked his disciples, why does your teacher eat with tax collectors and sinners? On hearing this, Jesus said, it's not the healthy who need a doctor, but the sick. But go and learn what this means. I desire mercy, not sacrifice, for I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners. See, Jesus is walking along, and it makes sense that he calls Peter, because Peter's this good Jewish guy, right? Jesus is this good Jewish rabbi. So it makes sense that a Jewish rabbi would call this good Jewish guy to come follow him. But Matthew, it just doesn't make sense, because he's a tax collector. He's like far from God. But Jesus says there's room even for you. And Matthew, he's so stoked about this. Like he says, Jesus, you gotta come to my house. And he throws a party. And the scriptures say that sinners and tax collectors showed up at the party. Do you know what sinners is code word for? Sinners. Yeah, people who are jacked up, people who are broken, people who are messed up, people who cuss, people who drink too much, people who don't have their life together, right? But Matthew brings them into the party. And do you know why Matthew invites these people to the party? Because these are his friends. Like, these are all the people he knows. And I think Matthew invited these people to the party because he's like, hey, if Jesus would accept me and invite me to follow him, maybe, just maybe, he has room for them too. If Jesus could accept somebody like me, maybe he could accept them too. And I wonder if at that party, Jesus looked at Matthew's friends, these sinners and tax collectors. And I wonder if what he told them was, there's room for you also. Like, I love you for who you are and not as you should be, because nobody is as they should be. No matter who you are, where you've been and what you've done, God loves you and I love you and you're accepted. And here's what you need to know, that I expect more failure from you than you expect from yourself, but I still call you by name. There's room even for you too. I mean, Jesus crashes into the life of these people who are far from God and says, you're welcome. You can come. There's a place for you too. Changes everything. But would you hear those words that I just spoke, not as being spoken to some people at a party 2,000 years ago, but being spoken to you? Because I don't know where you are in your life right now. I don't know what you believe about God. I don't know what you think about God. Maybe for some of you, you feel like you're far from God. You feel like some sinners or tax collectors. Can I just let you know there's room for you too? Jesus didn't come for the righteous, but he came for the people who are broken, messed up, jacked up, people like me, people like you. So Jesus crashes into Matthew's life and he says, there's grace for you. You don't deserve it, but I'm giving it to you. Jesus crashes into your life here and now and says, come, follow me. I know the way to a new life, to a better life. So Jesus calls Peter, he calls Matthew. And then these guys, they're following Jesus, right? They're following him. And for 3 years, Jesus has his ministry. But then all of a sudden, some things collide into Jesus, right? Like on Thursday night, Jesus is having his final meal with his disciples. Before that, Jesus walks into the city of Jerusalem on Sunday, and he's like this past Sunday it would have been. He walks into Jerusalem on Sunday, triumphant. People are hailing him as king. They want to forcibly make him the king of Israel. All right, but so there's this great triumph, there's this great momentum, there's this great joy and excitement at Jesus coming into town. And then on Thursday night, just several days later, Jesus is ambushed. After his final meal with his disciples, he's ambushed by this mob of temple guards, these guys who come with torches and clubs, and they arrest Jesus. And I say he was ambushed, but Jesus knew this was gonna happen, but it seemed like he was ambushed to his disciples. Even though Jesus told him he was gonna be arrested, even though Jesus told him that he would be handed over and eventually crucified on the cross, they didn't get it. So they saw this as an ambush. Where is this coming from? It's like this was out of nowhere. Jesus has been ambushed. And it's like this terrible time just crashes into this whole ministry. Because this is a moment of momentum, right? Things are on the up and up. Like, we are triumphant in this city. And now Jesus is arrested. And then he's taken, but before the ruling religious leaders, and he's put on trial. This kangaroo court happens. He's accused of these trumped up charges. False witnesses are produced. They say he's guilty. He's put before Pontius Pilate, who's the governor of the area. He can't find any fault in Jesus. He wants to let him go, but instead he has him condemned to be crucified. And then Jesus is stripped, beaten, whipped, and then he's forced to carry his own cross to the hill that he would eventually die, the hill of the skull, Golgotha. So in this moment, it's like a whirlwind of all these things that are happening, all this uncertainty. What is going on? We didn't plan for this. This wasn't in the cards. Why is this happening? And it's like all this just collides into the disciples' life, because the disciples have placed their hope in Jesus, and now he's hanging on a cross, right? So here's Jesus hanging on this cross so that he could bear the sin of the whole world, so that he could take your sin and my sin on himself and do away with it and give us life. See, Jesus went to the cross so that he could restore us to who God says we are. Here's who you are, just in case you didn't know. Genesis 1:27 says, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them." The truth is, you were created in God's image, and you were created to be good. But I don't know about you. I just want to ask you, how often have you lived in that identity? How often have you lived in the image of God, living up to the good he's called you to be? For me, not very often. There's times I fall short. There's times I don't get it right all the time. There's times where I mess up, and I live less than God's best for me. And the scriptures say this is sin. See, there's this moment each and every one of us have where we turn our back on God, and it's not just a one-time thing in our life. It's like a constant thing. Maybe you're doing it right now. And these are moments where we say, God, I want to go my own way instead of your way. And the scriptures say this, that there is no one righteous, not even one. For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. You don't need the Bible to tell you that, but you already know that you've sinned and fallen short of God's glory. I've sinned and fallen short of God's glory. There's some stuff wrong with me, and I get the consequences of that, right? There's this shame, there's this guilt, there's this remorse that I have. There's things that I've done that it's just, I know I'm just not right because of it. But this is why Jesus went to the cross, to make us right. See, Jesus lived a perfect life, a life we can't live, so that when he went to the cross, he could trade his death, the death he didn't deserve, for the death we deserve. And when Jesus was on the cross hanging there were these two criminals who were crucified on either side of Jesus. And one of them didn't get it. He hurled insults at Jesus, right? Here's the creator of the world. Here's the one who can control the wind and the seas, and he's out of control. He has no control on the cross. And this thief is hurling insults at him. But then the other thief, he notices what's going on. He sees what's happening and he says, wait, this guy's innocent. Like, he's dying for something he didn't even do. And that's the power of the cross. Jesus died for your sin and my sin, something he didn't do. But he died so that we could be free, so that we could be forgiven. Because here's what we get as a result of sin. Romans 6:23, the payment for sin is death, but the gift that God freely gives is everlasting life, found in Christ Jesus our Lord. Each and every one of us have had this moment, have had times in our life where we turn our backs on God, where we have these Kevin Martin moments, right? Where we say, Jesus Christ, get out of my life. Damn it, God, I'm done with this. It's over. We've had these moments. We have these moments. But Jesus on the cross says, I love you. I accept you. I understand. And when Jesus hung on the cross, I believe that he whispered your name. When Jesus hung on the cross, and I can't prove this from the scriptures, I believe what kept him there is he thought about you. He said, I need to do this for Victoria. I need to do this for Trevor. I need to continue on through this for Shane. I need to do this for Crystal. Like, I believe Jesus whispered your name on the cross. You were his motivation for staying there. And as Jesus hung there on the cross, his breathing became more laborious and shallow as the weight of our sin just piled on him. Deeper and deeper breaths became harder as his breathing became more shallow and the weight just pressed until eventually Jesus breathed his last breath. And when Jesus died on the cross, he was taken down, he was placed in a tomb. And it was in this moment as he hung on the cross, it was in this moment that like death crashed into Jesus, and it's like death had won, death had overcome. So he was taken down, he was placed in the tomb, and death reigned supreme. Friday night, Saturday, Sunday morning, it was over. The disciples' life had been interrupted, their Savior was dead. But that Sunday morning, breath, the same breath that spoke all things into existence, the same breath that breathed into the lungs of the very first man, Adam, the same breath that calmed the wind and the waves, the same breath that spoke your name on the cross, breath surged into the lungs of Jesus, and he came back to life. He resurrected from the grave. Jesus came alive and he conquered the grave. He conquered death. He took away the sting of death, and he triumphed victorious. See, death crashed into Jesus on the cross, but Jesus crashed into death in the tomb, and he resurrected, and he rolled the stone back, and he walked out victorious. And here's why that matters, because we know that if Jesus rose victorious, if Jesus conquered death, then he can help us be victorious in our life. Then he can help us conquer the things that plague us, that come against us. We know that if Jesus conquered death, then he gives us life here and now. That's why this matters. That's why we celebrate Easter. And that's why I decided to follow Jesus when I was 13. It was like Jesus crashed into my life, and I researched the resurrection and I found the evidence for it, and I saw if there really was a person who lived and died and rose again from the dead, man, that changes everything. And it's because of the resurrection, Jesus crashed into my life and changed me forever. And I believe if you've never made the decision to accept Jesus, today, He's colliding into your life, interrupting your regularly scheduled program so that He can show you that He knows, He loves you, and He understands, and He gives you victory through the resurrection.